Hey, everybody. What did Katie's girlfriend, her bestie, say occurred in 12,000 pages of text messages between them? We're going to find out. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the channel, Crafting and Crime Daily. I'm Rebecca. I am a former lawyer and a nurse, registered nurse, jack of all trades, master of none. Just gonna say. Anyway, this is the state of Massachusetts that is trying Ingolf Truek, he likes to be called Harry, for first-degree murder of his wife, Katie Truek. Now, they hadn't been married for very long. I'm still trying to figure out when this marriage occurred. I haven't heard a date yet. In any case, Vanessa Pettigrew was the first witness on the stand yesterday, and I'm going to recap this. It was an interesting day. A lot went on with one witness. There was a couple of other witnesses, but not as significant as this one. Her bestie. There were 12,000 pages of text messages between these two. They would text virtually every day. So how did they meet? Well, back in 2015, Vanessa, who she's now working as a quality improvement specialist. Now, what the heck is that? In the hospital setting, the quality improvement specialist collects data, and they assimilate this data and they have to report it to other agencies in order for the hospital to keep their certifications. But these are usually medical professionals because they've got to dig into the medical records to find the data that they need. So she was a former surgical technologist who actually worked with Harry, Ingolf Truek, at St. Elizabeth's Hospital. They call it St. E's. During the trial, you'll hear them refer to St. E's. It's St. Elizabeth. So she met Katie in 2015 when she sought her out as a therapist. Katie is a Reiki therapist. And the prosecutor's like, well, what is that? So that is where it's an energy therapy that helps with calming and giving you a feeling of great well-being. Do I believe in it? I don't know. I never even heard of it. So I have no idea. But she goes to a couple of sessions with Katie. They exchange phone numbers. She gets a lot of benefit from it. She decides she's going to become a Reiki therapist as well. So she knew when she first met Katie, she was married to a man named Chris Foley. They got a divorce. The 3 children that Katie has were not Chris's children. It was from her first marriage to Stephen Roca that she had the 3 children. So she knows that Katie met Ingolf, or Harry, through online dating. She admits that she and Katie would talk on the phone or text each other every single day. Different times of the day. Could be morning, could be night. It just depended on what was going on in their lives. And she said they would spend time with Katie and Harry. Birthdays, barbecues, things like that. So she wanted to get a job at St. Elizabeth's as a surgical tech. So I think she went to a job fair, and so she calls Katie and is like, hey, can you let Harry know, because he was the chief of surgery at St. E's. I'd love to get a job there. So he gets her a job at St. Elizabeth's. So when Katie originally moved into the house, not only were her 3 kids there, but he had kids, 2 or 3. I thought they said 2. It could be 3 from one of his previous marriages. And he had joint custody with those kids. So his kids weren't there all the time. Some of the time they were with their mother, who lived over in Dover. Oh, here it is. They were married in December in Vegas. I was trying to figure out, when did they get married? I want to put that in the timeline because I'm actually starting a timeline. December. Okay, that makes sense. 2019. Okay. So So she admits that, yes, they were married in December in Vegas, that in January she goes to get a restraining order. But there's more to that story. We're going to hear on cross-examination what that timeline really entails. In April, Harry sent a letter through his attorney wanting to reconcile. And then she was, this Vanessa said, Katie was going back and forth about it. She wanted, her focus was the kids. She just wanted the kids to be well, she just wanted the best for the kids. So whether or not to reconcile apparently had something to do with these kids. In order to reconcile, they had to come to an agreement on certain things, including a prenup agreement and agreement that he would get psychiatric help and refrain from drinking. Well, as soon as she said that, objection and sustained, please disregard that, stricken from the record. So we're not allowed to know that. Or the jury's not allowed to know that. So while he was in Florida, he comes back in April because they're going to reconcile. He's living in this hotel. It's COVID. It's difficult for him to get supplies and food, and Katie would take his stuff over to him. So on May 15th, 2020, at 8 a.m. that morning, Vanessa gets a text from Kurt. Kurt is sending over that snippet that I read yesterday. Hey, brother, she's a vindictive devil, that text. He sends that over to Vanessa and says, call me as soon as possible. I think this might be a popcorn situation. Now, what is a popcorn situation? Well, early May, actually what Vanessa tells the police is that last week, because she's interviewed that day, May 15th. She tells the police on May 15th that last week they come up with this code, her and Kurt. They came up with this code because these two are going to reconcile, so they needed a code in case Katie needed help. So that's what, and then they would need to respond to her as soon as possible. So that morning, she sees this information. She calls him, and she goes over to the house. She wants to check on the kids, make sure they're okay. Now, this whole time, starting in the morning, as soon as she gets this text, she's trying to call Katie. She's texting Katie. Katie is not responding. So she gets over to the house, knocks on the front door. There's no response. So she and her husband decide they're going to try to figure out what hotel it is Harry is living in. They don't know. It's in this other city, Denman. What did we say that city was? It was Denham. So there aren't a lot of hotels that they think Harry would stay at. So they have a suspicion that it's one particular hotel. So they drive by this hotel, and she sees both of their cars. They have a Jeep and a Mercedes, $150,000 Mercedes that, I might add, were his before she moved in. But she's using them. So that's both of their vehicles. They're in the hotel parking lot. So she takes a picture. And then she goes inside to the lobby, and she asks them to ring the room of Ingolf Truek. They do. He doesn't answer. So at this point, she and her husband, they go home, and she's trying to figure out, what am I doing? So they go back to the house, check on the kids again. I think they went before they went home. They went back to the house to check on the kids again. She walks around to the side door, which has a glass opening, and she looks inside, and she sees one of the kids in the kitchen. And she knocks on the door, startling this 13-year-old kid. And the kid comes to the door. He knows her. And she says, can I call your father, Stephen, their actual biological father? Stephen Roca. So she calls Stephen. After she gets back home, she calls Stephen. Oh, before that, she asks, are the other kids okay? Oh, yeah, they're all upstairs sleeping. So she goes back home. She calls Stephen Roca. And she says, the kids are home. They're alone. And we can't find Katie. She's not responding to my text. And she tells Stephen about this email that Harry sent to Kurt. She might have even sent it to him. She sent him the pictures that were at the hotel. And she goes, I really suggest that maybe we should get a wellness check. So he calls the hotel and gets the police involved. She doesn't know. She can't testify to any of that. All she can testify to is that she told him all that. Then later on in that day, she learns from Stephen. He calls her again and says, okay, the police are involved now. They've just taken Harry away in an ambulance. Katie's not there. That evening, both her and Kurt are brought into the police department for interviews. And during this interview, she voluntarily lets the police conduct an extraction of her cell phone. Now we get cross-examination, which first of all, let me just say, this defense attorney is rude. He is, he's not a friendly guy. He's just not. Can you just answer the question? Because this witness, she wants to elaborate on every answer. Well, that's normal. He'll say, is she on a dating website? Well, yeah, but that's normal. No, I don't know that it is normal when you're married to be on a wedding. Anyway, that's just me. So, and he'd say, just answer the question. It's a yes or no question. Anyway, not a nice guy. So he's talking about this 12,000 pages of text messages. And she agreed that within those text messages, she describes Harry's surgical skills as being like music, and that he was an excellent surgeon. And she agreed with him. Yes, I described it that way, and he was a very good surgeon. Then he wants to read some of these text messages, and the prosecution objects. So they have this lengthy sidebar. So one of the questions I got from a subscriber is, why is the defendant going up for the sidebar? That happens sometimes, that the defendant wants to hear the sidebars. Usually before a trial starts, the judge will ask how this is going to work out, because he can arrange ahead of time. If the bailiffs have a problem with the defendant moving around the courtroom, then they can arrange to have a wireless headset available for the defendant so he can hear the sidebars, he or she. I don't know if you recall the ballerina murder case where she always would put the headphones on whenever her lawyer went up to the sidebar. They always matched her outfit. That's the only reason I remember that. But in this case, Ingolf Truek is attending all of the sidebars. He is walking up and attending. So I imagine that they discussed this with the bailiffs, and the bailiffs were okay with it in this case. But they do have a right to hear the sidebars. But in this case, fun fact, the defense does not realize, the defendant attorney, that he's sitting in front of an open mic. He has not muted his mic. And we get to hear his comments to the defendant on several occasions that afternoon. It was really, really interesting. After this lengthy sidebar, they give the jury a break. They come back, and the reason that the sidebar is so lengthy is because this 12,000 pages of text messages is hearsay. So the judge has got to establish what is the exception to hearsay that you want the jury to hear these text messages. So his argument was, it's not for the truth. I just know this because that was the ruling, and the judge actually instructs the jury. These are not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. So jury, these are coming in. He tells the jury, these text messages that you're going to hear are not because they're true. It's because we want to know what Katie's state of mind was. And you have to remember in the back of your mind that you can only consider it if you think Harry knew what her state of mind was. Okay. So they're not coming in for the truth, but this attorney is getting a lot of statements in that the jury is not really supposed to hear, but he's getting them in. Then there's an objection, sustained, but he's already heard the question. He's getting all the information he wants the jury to hear, and through these text messages, even though there's an objection, cat's out of the bag, jury's heard it. Let me tell you what some of these statements were. So clearly Katie's going through Harry's cell phone. At one point, he says, Katie told you that he was going to lend $200,000 to a friend, and she had a problem with him depleting his assets. Well, of course, the judge sustained that. Jury's not allowed to hear it, but they heard it. She's concerned about his assets. Okay. And then there were, and you guys had texts about how much money he had sustained. Not allowed to answer that question, but we heard it. She was involved with dating sites. She mentioned that he was a dating site addict. He enjoyed the rush. And then at one point she says to Vanessa, says to Katie in a text, I guess I should work with Harry. You need a spy. And she gets a job with Harry. She says, no, I said that as a joke. So apparently both of them were active on tracking websites and dating websites, apparently. He asked her, she told you she was receiving photographs from multiple men in various states of undress and sporting equipment. Well, of course, that was sustained, and she wasn't allowed to answer, but she answered it anyway. She said, oh, that's the nature of online dating. And then Katie texted her about moving into the home with the 3 kids. Vanessa's response was, hey, good score. So he's like, what did you mean by good score? And she's like, oh, I just meant that, she met the one and, whatever. We know what she meant by good score. So here's the timeline that I have figured out. They met in November of 2018. She and the kids moved into the house in March of 2019. In December of 2019, they get married in Vegas. In January of 2020, she gets a letter from his attorney. He is seeking a divorce first. She gets a letter from his attorney saying he wants a divorce. February 3rd, she goes and gets a restraining order, gets him kicked out of his house. And then he's trying to find a place to live, ends up in Florida for a little while, starts making plans to go move to Germany. At one point, he asks Katie if he could live in the basement. So Vanessa says, well, why would Katie let him live in the basement? LOL. If they're not communicating, why would you let him? She goes, they needed a barrier between them. Then she mentioned that Vanessa mentioned that her husband speaks 4 languages. One of them is German. Katie had asked her several times, could he interpret text messages that Harry was getting from German women, or women that spoke German. Then the defense attorney asked her, she didn't put any money into that house, did she? And she goes, well, that's not true. She put money from the sale of her home into the house. And he goes, no, isn't it true she never put a nickel into that house? And now they're almost arguing. So that's sustained. That objection is sustained. So I don't know what it is. She said, it was my understanding that Katie put money into that house. So we don't know if Katie actually put money into that house, because there's some confusion, because then in the next few questions, she talks about how Katie was renting a home before she moved into a house. Yeah, so I didn't understand that. Then there were multiple, he says, weren't there multiple texts regarding her drinking? She would call you and say she's drunk, she's hungover. And then at one point you ask her if her drinking was okay. So that was objected to and sustained, but we heard it. Then he asked her about dating a dentist from New Hampshire. And she goes, well, while they were separated, but this dating continued after they decided to reconcile. She's still dating the dentist from New Hampshire. And then he asked her, she was concerned about him taking this position in Germany because of the salary, right? And she wasn't enough. And that was objected to and sustained. But again, the jury hears it. So very, very interesting cross-examination. We learned a lot about this couple in this cross-examination. She's definitely concerned, with the money. But I also gleaned from this conversation that the deed they recorded together was actually the deed to the house. It was part of that reconciliation arrangement that she be put on the deed of the house. So the next person on the stand is Todd Wilcox, Sergeant Todd Wilcox. He actually was the one in February that served the restraining order. He said he spent about 30 minutes with Harry because he said Harry was really upset, sad, and disappointed. He stayed there until Harry was ready to leave. So Harry left when he left. So Harry actually had to leave his own home. Then this sergeant was also involved on May 15th, 2020, when he was asked to do a wellness check for Katie at the house. He said that was around noon, 12:15, 12:20. They call it well-being checks. He had met, when he gets to the house, he meets with Stephen, the Roker, the father of the three boys, or the three children. I don't know if they're all boys or not. The father of her children. He meets with him, and they're all concerned because the master bedroom door is locked and they think she might be in there. So they get this device that all the officers have in their car where they can get into doors. Sometimes it splinters the door. So they get into the door of the master bedroom. There's nothing in there. He says, we were only in there for like 5 minutes. Didn't really look for anything of evidentiary value. Didn't see any glass on the floor, but they stayed in there long enough to call dispatch, have dispatch call Katie's phone number in case the cell phone might be in that bedroom. It was not. So they left that bedroom and proceeded to search the remainder of the house to make sure she wasn't in any other areas of the house. She was not. And that was the end of his involvement. Then we get another lengthy sidebar regarding scheduling, I'm sure. Kurt is the next person that takes the stand. His friend. Now, I thought it was just his friend. Apparently, Kurt was friends with Harry and Katie. Kurt lives near them. He met Katie and Harry probably 1.5 to 2 years prior to that May of 2020 at the American Legion. And he says, I was drinking. I don't really remember what day it was when I met him, but I was drunk. So, but he talks about living near the property where this pond is, but he said the pond was closer to their house, which was like a mile away. I didn't understand. He was talking about his home being backed up to some other property, but I never got whose property he was talking about, because he goes on to say that Harry and Katie's house was 1.5 miles away. So I didn't understand that. But he meets them at the American Legion. They become friends. He's got both their phone numbers. He texts both of them on occasion. He never met with them separately. He said, one time I met with Harry. We went to the dump together. But most of the time we would just get together, like cookouts and things like that. He'd go there. He had kids. They would go over there. So and that's where they left on his testimony for the day. They're not done with his testimony, but apparently they need to end court. They needed to end court by 1:00. And the same goes for today and Monday. They're ending the trial at 1 o'clock. Don't know why. So the judge, in addition to telling them that they're stopping trial at 1 o'clock all 3 days, he tells them that today, as we speak, they are doing a jury view. That's where everybody gets into a bus and they go over and look at all these properties. Because I need, at this point, as if I'm sitting there as a juror, I'm like, whose property is whose? I don't understand all this talk about property. So I think it's a good point to go on this jury view to figure out whose property is whose and where is this pond and so on and so forth. So that's going to happen today. So I will be with you again on Monday. Have a wonderful day. Let me know what you think of this woman's text messaging with Katie in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everybody. Bye.